All right, so welcome everyone to Career Design 101, how to create a fulfilling career. So just a few quick housekeeping items as everyone makes their way in. This session is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants after the event. So be looking out for that. And if you have any questions during, after, please feel free, at least to start with, send them in the chat, send them in the Q&A. Ashley is more than happy to answer them. So she's going to get us started and give us a presentation, and then we will have some questions at the end. If they are very specific, Ashley has graciously said that you could email her directly. So we will keep that in mind as those start coming in, but feel free to introduce yourself, say hello in chat, and then we will also have the Q&A as well. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful speaker. So Ashley Artrip is the co-founder and president of Mission Collaborative. So she's worked with thousands of working professionals to design successful careers that are engaging and fulfilling. So before Mission Collaborative, she worked at Gallup and other organizations where she focused on researching employee engagement and what contributes to a successful career. So while at Gallup, she became a certified Gallup Strengths Finder coach, enabling her to help others identify their strengths and harness them to design careers they love. So we are so excited to have her, and I'm just going to give her the floor, and we just thank you for being here, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And hello, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. I'm actually calling in from DC, where it's cold, but it's supposed to get a little bit warmer. And I know in North Carolina, it's supposed to get up to 70 this week. So that's very exciting for the spring. So the goal of this webinar is really to orient you to something that we call the career design process. This is a philosophy that you can apply to designing the next phase of your career, really at any stage of your career path. As a quick housekeeping note, as Anna mentioned, we will get to all the questions at the end. So feel free to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A feature. And if there is something specific, or if there's something that we just don't get to by the end of this, please feel free to send me an email. I'm more than happy to answer your question. I know this is a very, very kind of messy and scary process. So I'm more than happy to kind of chat with you one-on-one and address those questions. So thank you so much for having me here. And I guess with that, let's go ahead and jump into this. And I guess before I jump in, I'm going to stop sharing my video just so I don't have any connectivity issues, because I've had some weird Zoom issues the past couple of times I've done this. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, but I'll turn it back on for Q&A at the end here. So let's go ahead and get started here. So let's maybe talk about why you are here right now. So at some point in time, and perhaps you feel this way currently, you might feel disengaged, checked out, or burnt out at work, especially with the extra challenges in these past couple of years. It's very, very easy to feel overwhelmed and to not feel particularly engaged, kind of doing the same routine over and over again. If you're working from home, that obviously has, changed a bunch of things about how you kind of approached work before. And it actually turns out that this is a really common feeling, and it's not just specific to the challenges that the coronavirus has posed in our daily work life. In fact, each year, Gallup, the polling organization, does a poll called the State of the American Workforce, where they get a sense of how folks feel about their work and how engaged they are. And the results are always very stunning to me. So usually around 2/3 of Americans feel disengaged year after year. Before co-founding Mission Collaborative, as Anna mentioned, I actually worked at Gallup, and I spent a lot of time thinking about disengagement and its effects, not just on productivity with work, but its actual impact and how you feel in kind of your broader life. And the truth is that we spend a lot of time at work, right? And if we're doing things that don't necessarily give us energy or bring out the best version of ourselves, it's really quite a shame, in my opinion. And that's why I was so motivated to help individuals design more fulfilling careers in my own career. And that's really what we focus on here at Mission Collaborative. But making a change is obviously very, very hard. If it were easy, then most of us wouldn't feel stuck and disengaged the majority of the time. Most of us struggle with the following questions. So when folks come to our programs, they typically have these questions, like, what do I even want? What's out there for me? What are some possible career paths that my transferable skills could be best suited for? How do I avoid starting over? perhaps you have decades of experience and maybe even an expensive credential, and you're not really sure how to use that in a new path, and you don't want it to go to waste. Another question is, when will I have time for this, right? There are so many things going on in our lives. We're all so busy. And lastly, I'm just so overwhelmed. Where do I even start? And the fact is that, again, making a change is really difficult, but it's something that we're going to have to do throughout our career, maybe even multiple times. And the truth is that no one has really taught us how to do this. There might have been times in our lives where we've been really engaged and loved what we were doing, but circumstances change, and all of a sudden we no longer feel as engaged as we were, and we don't really know how to navigate what comes next for us. So what do we do? So if you're like most people, the first reaction that many of us have when we're feeling kind of backed into a corner or kind of feeling stuck in our jobs is that we actually just start applying to jobs online, right? We kind of look online at the job boards, apply to things that kind of sound interesting, or maybe we send our resume out into the void and kind of treat it like a numbers game. You might set a weekly goal of applying to X number of jobs each week and kind of just play the waiting game, just to wait to hear it from at least one organization to get back to you. And if you've ever done this, you probably know that this is a very exhausting strategy. I've seen a lot of people do this with little success, and sometimes even the worst case scenario happens in these circumstances where you actually get offered a job that you applied to online only to realize that it's not a good fit for you because you didn't really know what you were looking for in the first place. The second thing that some of us do is work with a fancy career coach, which is actually more of a joke because it's pretty expensive and inaccessible to most people, and they're not always guaranteed to land you a job by the end of their career coach. But then the most common thing that people do, and again, perhaps you've been there yourself, I know I have been there at one point in time in my career, is we do nothing. We kind of continue churning wherever we're at, feeling not fully engaged, and we sit here thinking that surely there's something better out there for me, but we're not really sure what to do differently. And so we end up being stuck until, maybe one day we wake up and realize that enough is enough and it's time to do something. So before we jump in any further, I just want to provide a little bit of background on myself. As Anna mentioned, my name is Ashley Artrip. I'm one of the co-founders and lead facilitators here at Mission Collaborative. On a more personal note, though, I actually grew up seeing both of my parents really hate their jobs. And I actually dreaded a lot about growing up and becoming an adult one day because I had this core belief that work is something that you don't look forward to, you're going to dread it. And since, kind of having that experience at a young age, I was always so fascinated about how people make career decisions and career choices. And, prior to co-founding Mission Collaborative, I worked at various organizations, researching and really digging into this question of how do you make more intentional career choices that will lead to more fulfillment in your career. The core of my expertise, though, is really applying the principles of design methodology called design thinking to your career path. You might be familiar with this already, but really what we're doing here is applying the principles of design thinking intentionally to our careers. And that's what we're going to dig into in just a second here. So now that you know a bit about me, I'll share a little bit about my organization, Mission Collaborative. We started back in 2017 offering full-day career change boot camps in person. In fact, NC State was one of our very, very first boot camps that we ever ran in person. And so we are so grateful for how our partnership has grown with you all. And as we got positive feedback around our in-person boot camps, we actually ended up moving to a virtual 30-day program to be able to serve more career designers. And since then, we've now scaled and have worked with thousands of participants from various backgrounds, industries, and ages, starting in early 20s to mid 70s. And again, we've worked with NC State for a couple of years now, offering this program, which was once in person, but now is virtual. And again, just so grateful for our partnership and to be able to work with all the fantastic alumni from NC State. And at the end of this webinar, I'll actually share a little bit more information about our upcoming NC State Career Design program. It starts on March 5th, and it's a really in-depth and hands-on program that walks you through the career design process. But you're going to get a really good taste of what that is today and have some really awesome action items that you can walk away with as a result of this webinar too. Okay, So on to the good stuff here. So what is the career design process? So I'm going to start with kind of a high level overview just to kind of orient you to this whole thing. First and foremost, regardless of where you are in your career, this process can work for you because it uses the same fundamental approach no matter where you are. And this process, again, was inspired by the principles of design thinking. So if you're interested in checking out a resource to learn more about that, I would recommend you reading Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett, who's out of the Stanford Design School. Perhaps many of you have read this book already. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. So this framework, coupled with the best practices in career coaching, really serves as the pillar of our program. Also, we take a lot of feedback from participants and we iterate the curriculum and making it better each time we run it. But overall, there are only 4 steps in this process. So reflection, definition, testing, and launch. And I will walk you through each of these here. So the first phase of the career design process is the reflection phase. And it's all about answering these kind of bigger life questions of who am I? What do I actually care about? What am I good at? And what do I really want to create in the world? Reflection is understanding what makes you the unique person that you are. And the reason it's so critically important to start with this deep self-reflection when you're designing the next phase of your career is to remind yourself of what actually matters. Oftentimes I see people dart from one career to the next, not really finding that longer term satisfaction that they're looking for, because they often haven't taken the time to take a step back and really identify what it is that's going to bring them more fulfillment. The second reason why we start with reflection is that we want to reduce the risk of making a misstep and jumping into a new career path that's not actually a better fit. And so the only way that we can avoid making that misstep is by having a much clearer sense of what we're looking for in the first place. And so it kind of, again, reinforces this need to know, who am I? What do I care about? What do I really want? The third reason we start with reflection is because it again allows you to have this clear idea of what you want and what you're looking for, and that will act as a compass for you. When I explain this, I always like to use the analogy of Google Maps. It would be so phenomenal if you could just type in a destination for your career and you could have the exact steps laid out in front of you on how to get there. But that doesn't exist, obviously. And in fact, I don't think it would make sense for it to exist because oftentimes our career destination changes over the course of our life. And our passions change, things change, circumstances change as well. So that wouldn't actually be a useful tool to have. So rather than thinking about career navigation as just making steady progress towards this kind of singular goal, we like to think of this as having kind of a compass that helps you navigate in the right direction. And so the better you understand yourself and your motivations, your interests, your values, and your strengths, the easier it is for you to navigate in the right direction for your career. So let's talk about some of the specifics here. So there are really 4 core areas of reflection that we talk about in the career design process. So the first is core values. So we all have values that serve as the guiding principles that help us make difficult decisions and navigate who we really want to be in the world. They are really important when you think about your career, because if you find yourself working in an organization or an industry that actually conflicts with one of your core values, it's really hard to find engagement and it's really hard to find fulfillment in that career path. As a simple example here, I work with a lot of folks who have perhaps worked in lucrative industries at one time, and they feel really unfulfilled in that work because they don't believe in the mission and their values don't align. And again, what's actually happening here is that there's just a conflict of core values. And so again, by knowing yourself and reflecting on those values, it's so critical that you know this before you make that next career decision. The second area of reflection is your strengths. So all of us have strengths, and these are sort of our natural tendencies and how we show up in the world by default. So it's kind of how we're naturally wired to think, feel, and behave in the world. Learning your strengths and leaning into them will always yield better results than just trying to avoid your weaknesses. In fact, there's actually a lot of research from positive psychology out there that suggests when we do work that best utilizes our strengths, we're far more effective and motivated than when we just do work that avoids our weaknesses. And so understanding what your strengths are and being able to name them is really helpful as you think about the different career moves that you could make. because that will better leverage those strengths and you'll have more energy and much more effectiveness in your work. The third area of reflection is skills. So specifically your transferable skills. So these are unlike your strengths because these are things that you're not really hardwired to do naturally. You cultivate your skills through rigor, through practice and intention. So for example, skills are something that you might get a certificate for, something that you might study, or something that you might learn on the job, for example. And all of us have skills, and many, if not most of the skills that you have are transferable to a lot of other careers. I work with so many career changers that assume that their skills are far too niche or they're too specific. And that's generally just not true. And instead of kind of, getting focused on, thinking that this skill is too niche or it's too specific, it's actually more of a problem around branding and how you talk about your skills to potential future employers is really kind of where the barrier is. So understanding what your skills are, as well as which of them are transferable, gives you a sort of toolbox to better understand yourself and a better way to move into that new career path. And then finally here, the fourth area of reflection is acknowledging your interests. So all of us have topics and causes and communities that we really care about. And if we're doing work that aligns with those interests, we are oftentimes a lot more engaged, a lot more fulfilled. And I think a lot of times people make compromises and they assume, well, I can't do work that, aligns with my love for animal rights, for example, because it doesn't pay enough. And that's often not true. And you can usually find work that's in an area of your interest, or it might be related to an area of interest. So taking inventory of what you're deeply interested in can really give you some good material to better understand what options might be out there for you. Okay, on to the next phase. So once we've gone through and reflected on who we are and what we care about, we are then ready to move into the second phase of the career design process, which is what we call the definition phase. Definition is all about figuring out the criteria that you want your next chapter of your career to satisfy and the different paths that could actually bring you there. So it's important to recognize when we're talking about careers that everyone's definition of success is very different. And in fact, just recognizing that can oftentimes be hugely liberating. What I often see is when I'm working with career designers is that a lot of them are striving for somebody else's definition of success, instead of thinking about what success actually looks like for them as an individual. The other thing that we like to talk about in the definition phase is that there might be many different career paths out there that could lead to fulfillment for you. And this idea that there is just this singular career path out there that's just waiting for you to discover is not the best advice. And it's just generally not true. It's sort of like when you hear somebody say, just find your passion and your career will present itself. The reality is that our passions change over time, and there are so many different paths and different ways that we could find something that's similarly fulfilling to us. And then broadly speaking, there are different trade-offs that you'll need to make as you define the next, or as you define the different paths that you can take. So the definition phase is really all about recognizing the criteria that you want the next chapter to satisfy, and then starting to identify those paths, again, that would align with those criteria, to leverage your strengths, your interests, your values, and so forth. So all of those things that we've talked about in the reflection phase. So there are two key steps within the definition phase. So the first is, again, what we call defining your career criteria. So roughly speaking, Mission Collaborative has kind of identified the 8 most important factors that you need to understand about yourself in order to get clarity on the options that you might be able to pursue in this next career move. So looking at this list here, it's not all that groundbreaking, right? It's pretty straightforward, but I'm always amazed at how few people actually sit down and think through their answers or their preferences to these 8 specific criteria. I won't go into these line by line. I can let you read through them here on screen. But once you've thought through what you want for each of these criteria, then you get to do the hard part, which is actually rank them from 1 to 8. So 1 is the most important thing that you need to prioritize for your next career move, and 8 is the least important thing that you need to prioritize. So for example, if I really, really care about the mission of an organization, I would put that as my number one preference for my career criteria. And so just this exercise alone can bring tremendous clarity. And it is part of what we do in the career design program that, again, I'll mention at the end. The second step of the definition phase here is to collect different career path ideas. So now you've laid out the kind of framework and the criteria for what you're looking for. The next step is to actually go out and look for opportunities that are interesting to you, that align with the criteria that you just identified. And there are actually a few ways to do this. So the first thing, which almost might seem too simple, is just to get a group of friends and family together and have a brainstorming session and see what kind of different career path ideas that they can come up with for you. You can kind of sit down with them and share your career criteria, and you can get their feedback on possibilities that you could look into. And really what's so powerful about this is it gets us out of our own heads, and it helps us rely on those who know us really, really well, who see strengths in us that we may not see for ourselves, and it really helps to generate some of those ideas. Another thing that you can do is use some career assessments and tools that can help you think through some new possibilities. So I know what you might be thinking here. These aren't the types of career assessments that you might have taken in high school, which usually come out pretty inaccurately. For example, I remember when I was in high school, I took one of these career assessments, and a friend of mine in my class got a result that they should be a fruit sorter for a living. I'm not really sure how that result came up, but there are so many new and improved tools out there, I promise you, that you can use to get started. And actually, the one I would recommend using is careerexplorer.com. I'll send that to Anna, and she can send that in the follow-up email to you, so you make sure you have that. Careerexplorer.com is great. It's a really comprehensive assessment that looks at your strengths, it looks at your personality, and it will give you a pretty good list of career path ideas. And it even goes into depth explaining why those might be a good fit for you, which I think is really, really important. And just to kind of add a disclaimer here, these are a great starting point. I do not think that these career assessments are kind of the end all be all answer, but I think it's really helpful to use these as kind of a way to generate ideas and identify different career paths that you may never have heard of or thought of before. Beyond kind of these career assessments, there's actually just a lot that you can find on the internet by just knowing how to look. So there are a tremendous number of resources out there, and you can honestly just kind of start your search. You can go to Google, you can just type in things such as alternative career paths for, fill in the blank title that you have. You'd actually be pretty surprised at how many folks have written about this in the past, or who have actually made a career transition from what you do now to a new career. And there are, so many blogs and other content out there about it that I would absolutely encourage you to check out and do some digging and finding that information. So again, there are plenty of great resources that exist right now, but the trick is learning how to find them. And that's honestly one of those things that we do teach you in the career design program, which again, I'll talk about here at the end. Okay, so now moving on to the next step, which is the testing phase. So the testing phase is all about evaluating your options. This is the step that is most commonly skipped by people, yet in my opinion, it is the absolute most important step of this entire process. The entire philosophy of the testing phase can kind of be summed up with the phrase, try it before you buy it, if you've ever heard of that. So once you've gone through the entire process of identifying these paths that could be a good fit for you, the next step, your next task here is to start narrowing down your options to make sure you choose the right one, rather than ending up in a job that's just no better than the one that you left or are planning to leave. And that's really what we're trying to do here in the testing phase. It's all about exploring these ideas before you commit to them. It's all about reducing the risk of taking the wrong step. And also, beyond making sure that this next move for you is a good one, this step can also really ignite your enthusiasm for the path that you're deciding to take. Because you're actually going to be able to have a taste for what that is. How many times have you gone into an interview and had to kind of fake it because you didn't actually want the job that you were interviewing for? I've done that, and I hate to admit that, but it's true. A lot of us have done that, and generally speaking, employers can really see through this, and it doesn't make you feel good having to kind of fake all that enthusiasm. And so the testing phase can really help you avoid all of that by bringing you tremendous clarity and confidence, because now you've actually successfully tried out your future career path, and you can be a much more compelling candidate when you go out and start interviewing, because you actually believe it's what you want to do and you're confident it's the next best move. Another kind of way to think about this is, you wouldn't buy a car without taking it for a test drive. And so one of the things that we really emphasize here is you wouldn't do that for your career either, right? So this really kind of helps you test it out before you fully commit to that path. Okay, so how do you actually do this testing thing? So there are a number of strategies that work really well for testing a career path. And they range from being really simple, but not always super effective, to a lot more intensive, but very, very enlightening and very insightful. So let's start with the easiest stuff here. So one of the easiest things that you can do to test out a potential career path is to actually just talk to somebody who already works in that role or in that industry. You can call up somebody you maybe already know, or maybe haven't spoken to in a while, and get a sense for what they like about it, what they don't like about it, and some of the broader challenges within the industry and so forth. And the key here is that the more that you connect with people who actually work in the industry and live in it in a day-to-day capacity, the easier it is for you to actually comprehend what it might be like if you were in their shoes. I also want to pause here because I know what you might be thinking. A lot of people that we work with tend to get uneasy about the idea of networking or reaching out to strangers and kind of the nerves associated with it. I completely understand that. I also feel that way. And a lot of folks kind of have this belief that networking is somewhat transactional and just disingenuous. But really this kind of approach here is very different. It's just kind of being vulnerable and transparent and just saying, hey, I'm asking for advice. You're approaching it with humility, and you also can offer something in return. And so that's kind of how we teach people to show up to these kind of conversations with a curious attitude, and approach it by saying, hey, I'm really interested in your work, how you got to where you are, and I would love to learn more about it. I'd be so grateful if you could connect with me for a few minutes and share your background. And I know your time is valuable, so I would be happy to perhaps help you work through any of the problems that you're thinking about at work, or maybe introduce you to somebody in my network who might be valuable to you. So kind of phrasing it in that way and kind of approaching it in that way can make you feel a lot better about reaching out, because you're being really transparent about what you want from this person, and you're already offering value to that person in return, so they know that their time is valuable to you. And again, these are kind of the types of techniques that we get into in the program. The second testing strategy is attending events and conferences. So obviously this was much easier to do in a pre-COVID world, but there are plenty of virtual events that you can attend where you don't even need to leave your living room, which is great, where you can not only meet practitioners who work in the space, but also engage in some of the content and the broader kind of conversations that are associated with the industry and the career path. And so going to these events or a meetup, for example, this is a really great way to get a taste of what this path is all about, because you're actually immersing yourself in some of the topics and the conversations that are taking place, so you know the challenges that you might face if you were decided to go into that industry. Okay, so the third testing strategy here is the most novel, but it's the one that I get the most excited about. So it's called a test project. And so most people have never tried this before, but it's actually quite accessible if you're willing to put in the effort. And to be completely transparent with you, it's actually how I've been able to figure out each job that I've had in my career. And so it's a really effective kind of strategy to test something out. So kind of the whole philosophy is this. So imagine if somebody handed you the career or role that you're interested in, and you were tasked with completing a project that you would probably likely be asked to work on, right? So you're imagining yourself in this role. Let's get a little tangible here. So let's say I want to become a graphic designer, and my goal here is to identify a project that I can do on my own time without anyone's permission. It's not going to take a lot of time. Perhaps this is a project that you can complete on a weekend. And I'm going to give myself a prompt to design a better logo for a company that I'm familiar with, right? Because that's something that ideally, that would be what a graphic designer does, among many other things that graphic designers do. But this is a really tangible way to kind of test this out. There's absolutely nothing stopping you or stopping me in this case, in this example, from going out and taking what I know about this career path and actually trying out a redesign of this logo. So this project won't take me a long time. And at the end of this, I'll have a work product that I can actually go out and share this with practitioners. So someone who's a graphic designer, and I can actually get their feedback on it. And they can tell me, one of two things, right? Like, oh, this is fantastic. Or, hey, you might want to adjust a few things here or take it in this new direction. Either way, this is a hugely insightful activity because now you validated that this is something that you would likely enjoy or not enjoy. And you could actually be a compelling candidate. So that's number two, right? So it's so validating. It's so helpful to actually understand kind of where you are in sort of the process of landing this next role, if this is something that you're interested in. Or perhaps you realize that this is something that you don't want to do. This project helped you realize that this is not something that's fulfilling, or you might need to just apply a little bit more practice before you're ready to commit to the path fully. Even more important than getting the feedback on kind of where you stand as a candidate is, again, getting that insight into how you feel about that project itself. If the idea of doing that project, not even doing the project, but the idea of doing the project for a couple of hours on a weekend is something that you're really dreading, then is that really, something that you want to do in your career? So this is really helpful in figuring out if this is something that you really want to pursue, right? So why would you ever want to do something as a full-time career if you didn't enjoy the test project, doing it for a couple of hours on a weekend? The project should feel really energizing. It should feel really rewarding, even though it's not 100% representative of what the role is. It's going to give you a really good taste as to what you would likely be doing if you were into that role. Again, this is going to give you a lot of clarity around how you feel about it and kind of where you stand as a candidate. But I am going to guess that you might be thinking in your head, sure, that works for graphic designers, but how can I do this for the career path that I'm thinking about? And I can assure you that you can do a test project for just about any career path that you can fathom. Again, this is something that we work on with all of our participants. We help them design test projects as part of the program. And again, like all test projects are going to look very differently depending on the path that you're interested in. But broadly speaking, the framework itself is very applicable across industries. And again, it's the sort of thing that we help you think through in the career design program. The fourth testing strategy here is to arrange a consulting gig, which is even more hands-on and it's even more involved. And essentially what it is kind of doing this career path as a side gig. So this is where you would actually go out and find a company or an organization or a client who is willing to pay you real money to have you complete a project for them. So for example, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Upwork.com. It's a marketplace where you can find projects, you can test them out. So for the graphic designer example, this would look like me going to Upwork.com and offering to redesign a company's logo, for example, and I could find somebody who would pay me to try this out. Obviously, this is going to be really helpful in learning whether or not you would enjoy this, and it will again give you a lot of clarity as to how qualified you are, because at this point, someone is now paying you for this, and they are definitely judging the product of your work, and so. Obviously, this strategy is much higher stakes, but it's going to ultimately be more insightful to really helping you figure out if this is something that you want to go into, and if this is, again, helping you try something before you buy it. Okay, so those are the 4 testing strategies that you could implement. But the thing I really want to emphasize here, and I want to really leave you with here, is that it is so critical to actually go out and run experiments. And that looks like collecting data. It looks like reflecting on kind of how you felt as a result of doing the test project and really getting a sense of what is going to be a good fit for you. Before you commit to anything, you should intentionally kind of go one by one and eliminate the options that aren't a good fit for you. And that will help kind of bring you towards the one that is a good fit for you. So in this case, process of elimination is really, really important. It might seem like this is a lot of work and a lot of time, but I can assure you that it is ultimately going to save you so many headaches and so much time over the course of your career, working in a role that may not be fulfilling for you. So again, just to really emphasize that here, it's really important to try something before you buy it when it comes to your career. Okay. All right, so now we're on to the fourth and final phase of this career design process. We're flying through this. This is called the launch phase. So the launch phase is when you actually go out and pursue that next option. So this is something that you do after you've done your research and after you've tested out the options and you are confident that this is the best fit for you and you're ready to land a job. This is the process that kind of most people are familiar with in terms of kind of the job search process. So for every 10 jobs that we apply to, we may hear back from one or two of them. Maybe you hear back from 3 or more if you're more qualified or if you've included the right keywords on your resume. This is a very ineffective process, and we teach you to do something a little bit more different, right? We kind of encourage you to take a more human approach to landing a job. So what you need to do to overcome the hurdles, right, if you're changing careers, if you are a non-traditional candidate, for example, is to really focus on relationships. And even if you're a non-traditional candidate too, focusing on relationships is the absolute most important thing of this phase. We are not in the business of teaching people how to game the kind of ATS systems. And we really do believe in the value of relationships because they can open doors for you that can't be found on a job board and oftentimes not even known to the public. And so when you've invested in relationships with employers and with individuals within those organizations, this process can be a lot smoother and honestly a lot more enjoyable, right? Because you're putting the human side back into it. And so the launch phase here is really just learning about effective relationship building with organizations who could hire somebody like you, even if they don't have a current job opening. So there are really 4 kind of key steps here to the launch phase. And the mantra that we always kind of say is relationships over resumes. And that's really what kind of guides this step in the career design process. The truth is that if you're a career changer or if you're switching industries, your resume may not stack up as favorably as somebody who has been in the industry for their entire career, for example. So you really do need to stand out for the competition and figure out a way to communicate your unique background as a strength, not as a weakness. And so in order to do that, you need to focus on building those relationships. That way, potential employers can understand that while you may not have those traditional qualifications that they see from some of the candidates that they get, you're somebody who is different, you're somebody who hustles, you have a unique perspective on things, and you can clearly deliver a lot of value. And once they've had a chance to really connect with you, they will feel a lot better about vouching for you as a candidate when they see your resume kind of come across their desk, because now they know you as a person. And so let's dig into the 4 steps here. So the first one is what we call making a short list. So don't worry about finding a current job opening. Instead, the approach here is that we actually want to have you focus on finding great fit organizations that you're really excited about, whether or not they are currently hiring. This is a better strategy than just focusing on what's currently available, because you're not in this sort of scarcity mindset of taking the first thing that's available to you. And instead, you're doing a much better job of focusing on where you'll be fulfilled long-term. And by the way, this is why it's really important to go through the career design process or the career design program proactively rather than reactively when you're not in a place of kind of finding a job as soon as possible. We do understand that for those who need something in the more immediate term, that this is not the best approach because this requires more time and energy. But we do have, different offerings and programs for those who do need a job as soon as possible, which again, I can have Anna send you a little bit more information on that if that's of interest to you. Then the second thing in the launch process is around building relationships. So again, this is really the keys here. So now that you've identified a few organizations that could be a good fit for you, the next step is to actually start building relationships with the employers who work within those organizations that you identified in that step 1. So then you can reach out to somebody who would probably be a peer or potentially even a manager or a boss. And you could say, hey, I'm thinking about making this career change. Your organization has been on my list for a long time. I'm a huge fan of the great work that you all are doing. I would love to be valuable to you guys. I would love to see how I can even help you right now when you're not hiring. This kind of gets to point number 3. I kind of blended right into this, which is to offer value rather than just asking for a handout. So this kind of looks like creating value, it's actually pretty simple. So it's about kind of positioning yourself as somebody who solves problems and creates impact for an employer. Because at the end of the day, employers really just want to know how you're going to create value for their organization. They want people who can enthusiastically solve problems and make meaningful impact for the organization. So if you are, working with somebody or talking to somebody and you can convince them that you can create value for their organization before you even apply to the company, you have just skyrocketed to the top of the candidate pile once applications do end up opening up. The fourth step here is around resumes and interviews. And so while we focus on relationships as being the most important component of the launch phase, we do know that you'll be asked for your resume. There's no getting around that. So by focusing on those relationships before your resume is requested, you can make sure that you won't get filtered out by those recruiting software tools, and you can make sure that you get to the top of the pile. So the final steps are really to optimize the resume in a way that focuses on the impact that you've created and highlights your transferable skills in a way that's really tailored and custom to that organization that you're applying to. And, again, when we're talking about interviews, it's really more of the same. It's about convincing them that you are somebody who can create impact and you can add a lot of value to their organization. Okay, so that was an overview of the career design process. Hopefully you feel like you've gotten something tangible that you can, work with right away. That's really the goal of this. You also might be thinking that, wow, Ashley, you just provided a ton of information and you might want to go through it in more of a slower kind of pace or like a piece by piece approach, and perhaps even have some accountability in the process. Again, we know career change is very difficult. It's oftentimes it's messy and it's emotional. And so you perhaps need some inspiration and motivation along the way. And that's really why we've created the career design program in the first place. And we would love for you to join us. So the 30-day online program is specifically for NC State alumni. It starts on March 5th. The deadline to enroll is February 28th. If you enroll by February 12th, you can save $50. There's actually a little bit of a discount too if you're a member of the Alumni Association. So I highly encourage you to check that out. We also offer scholarships for those who demonstrate financial need. It's really important for us that, for anybody who wants to go through this program and get this content, that we make it accessible to most people. And this program really only requires about 5 hours of your time per week. It's 30 days again. And if this start date actually doesn't work for you, we have a public version of the program that will take place later in May. If you're interested in that, if you just go to our website, missioncollaborative.com, you can get more information there. Obviously, I am very biased, but I think the program is very much worth considering, especially if you're at a point where you're starting to kind of ask yourself, what comes next in my career? That's all the content that I have to share with you. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and I will turn my camera back on here, and then I will turn it over to Anna to facilitate some Q&A. So Anna, whenever you're ready, I'm happy to answer any questions that came up.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate it. I know I've taken a lot of notes, some really good advice for us to definitely keep in mind as we move into our next phase. And even if you don't want to, even if you're questioning if you should change, this is always just a really good us to follow. Okay, so our first question, let me get my mouse working, is what does experience suggest for successful career transitions about the significant/necessity of internships for mid-career professionals?
Yeah, I kind of missed you on the first part. Could you ask the first part of the question again?
Sure. So it was just, what does experience suggest for a successful career transition about the significance necessity of internships for a mid-career professional? So I think the first part was just, in your experience, what have you seen for people in career transition? Do you see them do some sort of internship?
I think internship is kind of a blanket term that I oftentimes use for, could be a project as an example of an internship, but it's really getting that kind of firsthand experience doing that job. It doesn't necessarily look like applying to, kind of the traditional version of what you might think of when you hear the internship, like an entry-level internship. It's more of something that is a fully kind of immersed way of testing out a career path. Could be taking on a project for example, if you're working within a company and you want to, try perhaps a different department, it could be, I'm going to take on a project at that department and try my hand at that and see if that's something that I like. So that would be kind of the example of an internship when you're probably mid and later in your career.
Gotcha. So it's the catch-all term. It's not the formalized internship that you think of when you're a college student.
Yeah, but it also could be, right? So if you are
Okay.
earlier in your career, that's probably what that would look like.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Another question was, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm in a career transition right now. I'm finishing my PhD in engineering. So the tips about the test projects, arranging consulting gig is something they could try. He's actually read Gallups books like Strengths Finder and has helped assess with strengths. So the question is, are there other resources in your program? So how do I get started?
Yeah, so I would say just kind of identifying strengths is the first piece. I would say, another thing to look at is really where are your interests, right? So if you are getting a PhD in engineering, where would you like to apply that specific skill set and that specific background? Is there a cause? Is there a community that you feel really passionately about? That's sort of the process that we kind of walk you through in the reflection phase. So we have you kind of sit down, and there are plenty of resources and exercises and worksheets that we provide that kind of help you list out and take, what's in your head and actually get it down on paper and do those reflection exercises to, really narrow down what is drawing you to specific industries. And then from there, using that background and that skill set, then you can find organizations that would align with those passions, those interests, and those strengths in particular that you have, to then, obviously go and find a job ultimately.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, we're getting the questions rolling in, so I'm just going to
love it.
Okay, so I thought this one was great. What if you can't seem to get excited about your career path? So this person has done a lot of searching over the years, and it all feels heavy and not right for me. So attempting to transition from a legal career, but have not found any job yet on the job boards, at least, that really light him up.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for asking that question, because that is something that so many people feel. And I think just first and foremost, I just want to acknowledge that you are not alone in feeling that way. And I think that's just really important to acknowledge, because it is hard to get excited about something that you don't really know what it's like to do on a daily basis. And so I actually would say there are probably a couple of things happening here. So one, there might be a little bit of burnout that's taking place, right? So having some separation between yourself and your work self might be helpful, just to kind of take a brain break and just kind of reset and kind of approach this from kind of a fresh set of eyes or a fresh, mindset. And I would say the other thing that's probably really important is, again, without knowing all the things that you've done to research these different career paths, is actually go out and try something that does seem relatively interesting to you. Because looking at a job description on a job board is very different from actually going out and doing those things. And you can start as easy as just volunteering in a particular organization that might sound interesting to you. And then you can work your way to doing more of like a test project or something like that. But I would just say start really small and give yourself a lot of grace and forgiveness if it's not something that you want to do, the first thing that you try. But I think the kind of the approach here is you really want to actually get your hands dirty and testing something out before kind of making the assumption or kind of writing something off before you've really gone out and tried that thing. But that's a very good question.
Yes. And just keep talking to people, even people that you know that are family members. Maybe you haven't actually been intentional about the questions that you're asking. So that's always really a good way to get insight. So this person has lived in a rural area and hasn't worked professionally in years because of raising the family. Do you feel like you can help middle-aged women relaunch a very stalled career? So they have a graduate degree, but maybe haven't done it in decades. So
yeah, absolutely. In fact, we actually have a lot of, mothers returning to work. We have a lot of folks who have taken sabbaticals from work, for example. A lot of people during COVID have taken some time off, which I think is fantastic, right? But I think the key there is kind of when you're explaining kind of the time when you're out of the workforce, it's all about kind of communicating a story around who were you at that time? What did you learn? What were the things that you did? And I think it's really all about, crafting a compelling story around, again, your learnings, what you did, and what actually motivates you to work at a specific organization. So what resonates with you about a particular organization that you might be applying to? I think this is kind of the similar mindset that career transitioners have when they're going from one industry to the next. It's sort of this fear of, I don't have the transferable skills that are needed for this role. And again, it might just be a branding problem. It might be just more talking about how did you use those skills and how might you leverage those in a new career path? Because, being a mother is not easy. There are so many different skills that you need to be a good parent. And so it's really just kind of sitting down and thinking through, what have I done particularly well? What are some of the skills that I've cultivated during this time? And then again, kind of matching that to whatever job that you're applying to, and really emphasizing that, hey, I do have these skills. They may not look the way they did for a traditional candidate, but here's how I can leverage them at your organization. Here's how I can provide impact.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I think this is a good one to piggyback because it's talking about a good resource for figuring out your priorities and career criteria. So this was the example. How do I determine what size of company I'm looking for if I've never worked for a company of X size?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. You really can't tell until you've really started getting into the workforce. But I would actually say before that, I would start talking to people. I would do something called a listening tour. So that's where you could kind of sit down and just write down a list of people who work at various sized organizations. Kind of doesn't really matter the industry, although it is important to pay attention to the industries and kind of what people say. But I think you can probably just sit down and say, hey, what's it like working in an organization of this size? What are the pros? What are the cons? And encourage that person to not be specific around the industry they're in, especially if they're not, doing something that you want to do. But I think it's really important to talk to individuals who work at bigger organizations, learn what they like about it, and also learn what they don't like about it, because then you can kind of use those as data points for you as you make that decision. I always thought I would love working in a big organization. And in fact, once I got into a big organization, I learned that I didn't love that. But the good news is that I worked for a really small team within a bigger company. And so also just want you to kind of know that it's not kind of, if you make a decision and you decide it's not great, there are ways to kind of make things feel smaller or bigger, depending on the organization that you're in. You'll just kind of have to do a little bit of crafting around kind of who the community is that you work with within your organization.
Very good. Thank you. So the next two are interesting because they're like the polar opposites as far as timeline. So one,
okay,
fresh out of college professional, so rebranding their skills from teaching. When most careers I've seen posted want 2 to 5 years of experience. So that was the first bit, and we'll get to the second one. But it was just interesting that they came in and they were polar opposite sides of the age bracket. So
yeah. So sorry, just to get specific, is the question,
yes.
How do I rebrand my skills in teaching to a role that requires more experience than I have to offer? Is that kind of what I heard?
That's what I took from it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess my first point here is that job descriptions, companies, when they put out a job description, they actually don't assume that you will hit 100% of the bullet points that they mention. Generally speaking, if you can match around 75% of the bullet points that they have, then that's a good fit for you to apply to. Because oftentimes they will add a couple of bullet points that they would ideally like to have as a potential candidate, but they're not really expecting for you to have. So that's the first point. Second point there is, again, just to not get caught up in just kind of the exact years, but there are very much ways that you can communicate your experience in teaching and leverage that as a way to kind of, I want to say this in air quotes, but make up for that time that you didn't necessarily have those 2 to 5 years of experience. Teaching is difficult. There are so many different skills that you need to be an effective teacher. It's communication, it's persuasion skills, it's being able to take information and distill it down into really easy, digestible pieces of information. I would say what I think would be really important for you to do is look at a sample of a teacher's job description and then compare that right next to the job description that you're looking for, and then start to kind of go back and forth and say, this is really interesting. These are kind of getting at the same thing, but they're phrased differently. So there are so many transferable skills across job descriptions that just use different ways to describe the same skill. So I wouldn't get too caught up in what the exact description says.
Yep. And I've actually seen too, even like if you meet 50% of the bullet points, like anywhere from 50 to 75. So a lot of companies want what we call the purple unicorn. So they don't actually exist sometimes. It's
Right.
more of like a wish list than a must-have list. So just something
Yep.
to keep. And I will say too, and I'm going to send out an email with the information about the fellowship because we'd love to have you join us. Also, I wanted to say, if you do want to meet one-on-one outside of the fellowship, I mean, we do have career coaching as a benefit of joining the Alumni Association. So I'm just going to drop a link here just to kind of show different resources that we have available to you. But just wanted our audience to know that. So it looks like we had actually 2 questions come in from retirees. So the first one was, I guess the main question is, looking for a part-time job in a different field, age is an issue to some employers. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, it's kind of all about the storytelling piece. I mean, ageism is real, and it's very unfortunate that exists, but it's sort of one of those things that is really hard to navigate. So I guess my first piece of advice is do some research on the actual company itself. So Glassdoor is a really great resource for you to use just to kind of understand, how do companies feel about their employees, or how do employees, feel about their companies. If there are some themes around discrimination or a lot of negative reviews, or even like if you look on their LinkedIn and they all have, a particularly, younger set of individuals who work there, then that may not be a good fit and you may run into those problems. So I would say do your kind of research on the organization first before you kind of get excited and commit to that. And I would say look for organizations that have really stellar reviews on kind of the Glassdoor websites of the world, and who also kind of have that kind of diverse set of ages on, their company website if they have it there. Or you can also just go onto LinkedIn and look at their employees. But then to get kind of tactical about your question, I think again it's all about how you tell that story. It's all about how you kind of talk about your skills that you acquired, over the course of your career, and leveraging your experience is something that is so valuable to a company versus it being a drawback. And so I also think kind of shifting your mindset too of, thinking like, hey, my experience is a really good thing. I have not only more work experience, but I also have more life experience that I can apply in this role. Companies are dying for that stuff. I think it's really, really important to kind of also have that mindset. But I think my broader point here is just make sure you're doing your due diligence on the company before you really kind of invest in that. And then also figure out ways that you can kind of craft a story around how you can position your experience and, your just kind of your broader skill set as a benefit, versus something that may be a potential drawback.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we are at time, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So it looks like there were some other questions that came through. Some of them look to be a little specific. So I will definitely share Ashley's information. She has been gracious enough to offer to answer some of these after this event. So please be on the lookout for the follow-up email. Once I get the recording from Zoom, I will send it to everybody along with Ashley's contact information about the fellowship, and just some additional information about Alumni Career Services as well. So thank you, Ashley, so much for joining us. We loved having you. I thought everything was wonderful, such great information, and we just appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. And again, please send me questions if you guys have them. This is a difficult thing to do, but I am more than happy to give you my time and help you kind of think through what you're stuck with. And obviously would love for you to join the program as well. So thank you so much for having me. And hope to see you all soon.
Thank you. And we have a lot of thank yous coming through. So we appreciate that. And we hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.
Go back.